Two presentations today. I'm going to hand over to the first speaker in just a moment. In terms of the format of the session, what I'm thinking is each of the talks is around 20 minutes. So we'll probably hear the first talk, then we'll have an opportunity for any sort of burning questions, and then I want to move quite quickly to the second talk, so we've got quite a lot of space for a more general discussion once you've heard both sessions. I hope that all makes sense. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the stage Brekhna Jamil from the University of Dundee, and Brekhna's talk is Developing and Validating a Sense of Belongingness Scale. Over to you, Brekhna.
Thank you very much for giving me this honor. So I am Brekhna Jamil, and I am the PhD student at Center of Medical Education at University of Dundee. So I'm working on developing and validating sense of belongingness scale in online distance learning environment in postgraduate settings. So my supervisors are Susie Schofield and Wendy Moffett. This is what I'm working on, and I'm just finishing. I have just finishing in the finishing stage of my PhD and the whole work that I've done so far that I will be discussing with. This is the outline of my presentation. It will be having the introduction, the rationale, the research objectives, questions, and the three studies that comes under this developing and validating the sense of belongingness scale. So if we can talk about the terms belonging and belongingness, in the literature, you will find these two terms. So what does that mean, basically? Belonging, and whether we use the belonging or whether we use the belongingness or whether we use the both. So according to the word belonging derives from the Old English word gelang, meaning dependent, or the Middle English word belongen. So this word derives from this, which means long dependent. So the term belonging, two terms have been used in the literature. If you look into the literature, one is the belonging, one is the belongingness. So how does it is the same word? It's interchangeably used, or what? So the term belonging, as explained by Oxford Dictionary, as a noun, the feeling of being comfortable and happy in a particular situation or with a particular group of people. It's not. So belongingness, if we can look into the belongingness, that is a noun that refers to the state of condition of belonging. So it emerges from the belonging. But if we can look into the synonyms for belonging and belongingness in the literature, so the synonym for both the terms are the same, like acceptance, affinity, association, attachment, fellowship, inclusion, rapid building, and relationships. So we can use the both terms, and it can be used interchangeably, belonging and belongingness both. According to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, belongingness comes in between, like what he says. He stated that humans have a fundamental need to belong, and others' needs such as learning cannot be met without satisfying these needs of belongingness. So according to the Maslow's, this is one of the basic human needs that we need to belong to. We look to have to, like after the basic needs, which includes the food, water, basic security, shelter, safety needs. After that, we should have the psychological needs that should be covered, and that comes the belongingness, that we should have belongingness with the environment, with the institution, with the people, with the like workplace where we are working, where we are studying. So this is the basic needs for the human, to have belonging with the family, with the friends, with the colleagues, with the environment. So if we can look into the sense of belongingness in educational environment, this is one of the good definition that has been used in the literature, in this very famous definition, which comes under the belongingness theme into the educational environment, according to Goodnow. And he said, being accepted, valued, included, and encouraged by others. By others means teachers and peers into the institutional environment. But I would recommend to say that it's not only teachers and peers, it's also include the professional services staff, everything around you in the institution. So in the academic classroom, also feeling oneself to be an important part of the life and activity of the class. More than simple perceived like a warmth, it also involves support and respect of personal autonomy, and for the students as an individual. So why is it importance of belongingness? Why is it important? Because the greater a student's sense of belonging to the university, the greater to his or her commitment to that institution, and the more likely that he will remain. Another that Strayhorn built upon the criteria or the hierarchy of the Maslow's, and he stated that if a sense of belonging is not developed, learners' ability to attend to that task at hand, studying and fulfilling the goals of higher education will be impeded. Another, there is the lead author of an extensive research project involving 22 higher education institutions in the United Kingdom, conclude that at the heart of successful retention and successful strong sense of belonging in higher education is required for all students. So that's why this is important, and we look into whether in the online learning environment or in the campus-based learning, we need to look into that component, sense of belongingness of the students towards the institutions. Now, if we look into the literature, campus-based learning versus online distance learning. So sense of belongingness is well established. The concept is well established in campus-based learning, well recognized, and you will find many of the strategies and many of the scales that has been developed into the campus-based learning environment that measure the sense of belongingness, whether in the nursing, medical side, whether in the higher education side, you will find many of the scales. But when it comes into the online learning distance environment, there is limited research even to explore that concept into the sense of belongingness into the educational environment, as well as there is no developed tool or validated tool that can measure the sense of belongingness in online learning environment. So my study basically focuses on these such things, that I have developed the scale that can measure the sense of belongingness into postgraduate settings in online learning environment. So the literature gap that I find into the literature, an extensive literature search identified no large countrywide study that explored the sense of belongingness experience in online distance learning, and research specifically exploring sense of belongingness in distance learning is limited, and there is no validated tool for measuring belongingness in online learning. Many of the existing scales are available, but that is for the campus-based learning. However, that cannot be replicated, that cannot be used for the online learning environment, because there is a huge difference between the campus-based learning and the online learning environment. So my project goal is to develop and validate an instrument that measures sense of belongingness in postgraduates online distance learners. The research questions that I focused on, the first study, I have conducted 3 studies into 3 phases. I have developed the scale into 3 phases. So the first study is qualitative study, the second one is Delphi study, and the third one is psychometric validation of the scale. So in qualitative studies, my research question was, how do postgraduates help professionals education online distance learners perceive sense of belongingness, and how can they define and describe this concept? As I said earlier, this concept is not well established in the literature. So first of all, I just define the concept. How do the postgraduates perceive this concept in online distance learning environment? So based on that concepts and ideas, I have developed the constructs for the sense of belongingness scales through a series of studies. Like I've conducted the Delphi studies, in which the question was, which constructs of the sense of belonging instruments do education experts agree upon, and how do they rank them according to their importance? Then the third phase was when I have developed or generated, passes through the phases of Delphi technique, to content validation, to response validation. Then the last stage was, what is the valid and reliable instrument? I did the psychometric analysis, exploratory factor analysis, basically. So it started from the literature review, item formulation for interviews for the qualitative phase. Then interviews I have conducted with the postgraduate students, 40 number of postgraduates that I have conducted interview with. Questionnaire development based on literature reviews and interviews. Then Delphi rounds I have conducted with the 50 experts. then established the content validity for the scale with the 30 experts. Then I established the response validity, and at the end, established the construct validity and reliability. So that included the phase 1, the qualitative study. The phase 2 conducted, it includes the Delphi stage, the content validation, and the response validation. And the phase 3 is basically the psychometric analysis. So study 1, qualitative research. What I have done in this phase? So I have conducted the methodology was in-depth interviews, the ethical approval taken from the University of Dundee Ethics Board. And the study design for this phase was qualitative study, and that was the case studies. 4 case studies I have conducted under this study. And that was conducted in Pakistan, 4 universities. As I belong to Pakistan, I reside in Pakistan, so I conducted that study. We have the online programs for postgraduate settings in health professions education, so I've conducted 4 universities from there. And duration was for 8 months, and sampling was, I've included the postgraduate students who were enrolled in online distance learning environment into those universities. So from each university, I did the sampling. We have 4 provinces, so I've collected from each university 10 students, but that 10 was based on the data saturation. So in qualitative studies, data saturation means that you have to collect the data from the, like for example, I have started from this Peshawar one, that is the Khyber Medical University one. So I've included the students, but where I have got the similar kind of responses, so I stopped the data collection process. So in each site, there was maximum 7 or 8 I got this data saturation, but I have done extra 2 so that I cannot miss anything. So I've stopped on the 10 at each site. So the total interviews I did in this phase, that was a total of 40 from each site. So I just want to get the holistic approach from each site. There was sometimes a very new thing that came from one region, another thing from another region. Basically, the main crux was the same, but something I want to, like sometimes people asked me, I have presented it in some conferences, so people ask, why you have conducted 40 students, why 40 interviews, that is so big, you can get on the 10, on the 11, but actually there was different regions, so different geographical areas, so I just don't want it to miss, I want to get the holistic approach so that I cannot miss anything under those concepts. Then according to the Bronze and Clark's thematic framework, I have analyzed the qualitative study. According to this framework, I have developed the codes, then the axial coding, then the categories and themes, and using the Bronze and Clark's thematic framework analysis. So these are my codes, if you look into that. So it's a strong belief communication. Communication is the key to belongingness. Another one, I feel very much connected when I ask for some query from my tutors, peers, or other supporting staff. In the literature, the preliminary, when I have noticed, basically the belongingness concept they have just given for the peers and the tutors. They've forgotten many of the things, the professional services staff. So it's also included that they have to give some importance by the professional services staff, like the support. So if you can look into this course, so supporting staff, and they could immediately respond me back, the immediate respond. And I feel more connected when tutors call me by name during the synchronous environment, during the synchronous session, if there is any. And then even brought me more to attach towards any facilitators if they are always available on email. So immediate response, calling by name, or communication, interaction, group activities, synchronous sessions, they felt that they belonged to this environment more. So another one is I look up to the tutor, peers, and professionals for guidance and help, and if provided, I really do feel belong to them. So that comes under the support, so you are supporting. So altogether, these themes, this course, I have extracted the 5 themes that includes the usability, e-immediacy, interaction, support, and participation. So in the usability, that the participants felt that if their internet is not working, or if they are very much new to the internet or the using of the laptops or using of the computers. So they are not feeling belong to them. So these comes under the usability, like or a learning management environment or the virtual setting, if they are not comfortable with that, so that comes under the usability theme. Immediacy, that is the theme that I've noticed or extracted from my data. Immediacy means like immediate. They want immediate response, immediate feedback. So immediate call. If they are like calling to even professional services staff, so if the response get delayed, so they are not feeling that they are belong to the university or the environment or the institution. And then interaction, yes, they found that they should have some interactive activities with the peers, with the facilitators. And the support, they should be provided by the facilitators, by the peers, the professional services staff, by the administrative staff. And the participation, yes, the group activities, such activities, they want to have that they should participate in such activities. So these are the 5 themes. So based on those 5 themes, considering those 5 themes, I have developed the items, considering those 5 themes. The items that I've developed under those themes, that were the statements that was given by the postgraduate students that I've interviewed with. So I've just collected all the statements that related to under those 5 themes. And initially, I've developed 250 plus statements. So I was just looking again through the statements and discussing with my supervisor, and so I have removed the duplicates and finally found the 69 items. That was the first step for the Delphi step. So 69 items I've generated under those themes, considering those 5 themes. I was just looking and also looking back to the literature if I cannot miss anything into the literature and relate it to my work. So 69 items I have generated at this stage. That was the study 1. So that gives me the themes, and based on the themes, I have developed the 69 items. Then comes to in study 2, I have done the Delphi technique, Delphi study, the content validation, the response validation. So in Delphi technique, and the final items I've generated in the study 2. So Delphi study is to determine the construct of sense of belongingness scale through consensus. In Delphi technique, there are some variations in the literature. I have used the modified Delphi technique, where we need to have the, in the simple Delphi technique, there is you have to take the data from the constructs from the literature, and then you start round 1, round 2, and round 3. And I have used the modified one, where I have conducted the first phase, the interviews with the postgrad learners. How do they feel about the sense of belongingness in online learning? So based on their data or the themes that I've extracted, I've developed the items. And then those items, I have selected the experts that they have to validate, or they have to agree upon those items, whether it will be included whether it should be included for the item, for the sense of belongingness scales or not. So there are 2 or 3 rounds that you have to send to the experts in round 1, and they will give you the feedback on whether the particular questions should be included or not. And then round 2 and then round 3, it depends when we get the consensus. So first of all, I have defined the experts. In literature, there is no defined criteria for finding the experts, but yes, it depends upon your study. Like if my study is related that I am developing a tool for the online learners, so I will select the experts according to my study. Like that will be included those facilitators or instructors, those who are involved in the online distance learning, those they are teaching. Also the course designers, and also some of the educational experts that they can give me the consensus, or they can give me the feedback on the items. And also I have included the recent postgraduates who have recently passed. So these were my experts in this study. Postgraduates who completed Masters in Health Professions Education, so Masters of Medical Education, equivalent courses through distance learning. Instructors involved in teaching and supervising distance learning health professions courses, experienced professionals, research psychologists, psychometric specialists, other academics involved in distance learning, and those involved in the administration and coordination of distance learning programs. So these were the experts. I found that that would be more appropriate for giving me the feedback on the items that I've generated. Then, after identifying in the Delphi state, I identified the experts. Those were my experts. And then I have developed the rating scale for the items. The 69 items that I've developed, for that I have developed the rating scales. And I've asked the experts to rate those items based on the scales. And that is the 5-point Likert scale. So the subject experts I have selected. In the literature, there is no defined criteria on the numbers even, that how many experts you can be, but at least it should not be less than 6 to 10. At least it must be 6, or must be 3 even. In some literature, it's 3. And for a good study, you can increase up to even 50, up to 60, or even 100. But it's like you have to look into your studies how many you can find it. So I found I sent the items, that rating scale, and the 69 items questionnaire to the 60 number of experts in the first round. In the second round, and they have, in the round 1, 50 responded to me in round 1. And in round 2, 43 responded. So what happened in round 1 and round 2, I have sent the 69 items scale to the 60 number of experts, and in round 1, only 50 responded back based on this scale. They rated the items based on this scale: extremely important, not important, very important, slightly important. So, and also they have given me the suggestions. I have also asked if they have any suggestions on each of the items. So what they have done, they have given me the feedback based on this questionnaire, and also provided me some suggestions in the form of open-ended. In round 1, the criteria that I have set for inclusion or for the consensus, what there is, again, in the literature, you can have either the percentage agreement, either 50%, either 60%, either 70%, but recommendation is like at least it should not be less than 50%, but I have kept it the 80%. Then you can, median score, it depends, but I have selected these 3 criteria: the percentage agreement, 80%, median score 4, interquartile range 1 or less. And I have calculated this for each statement for round 1 after receiving the feedback, after receiving the ratings from the experts in round 1. I have calculated this for each item. Like, I have selected this criteria. Included for ranking, if you look at there, included for ranking met all consensus criteria for all participants for individual professional groups. So that is for meeting all consensus criteria. Like if it's if the percent agreement comes 80%, median score 4, or interquartile range 1 or less than 1 for statement, then I have included in round 1. And if it's included for retaining met 2 consensus criteria, removed from the study met 1 or no consensus criteria. So that was the criteria I've set for each of the items. And I've calculated, if you look at here, I've calculated the median score, the IQ range, and percent agreement, and I've used this criteria. So in round 1, I have achieved out of 69, 20, on the out of 69, 26, I got on 26 items, I got the consensus in round 1. And then in round 2, I have again sent the remaining left to the same participants for re-rate the items, as you have to do in the Delphi approach. So I've sent them again, and I got the consensus on 17 of the items. So out of 69, the total items I got consensus was 43 items remains left. So that were the items that I got the consensus. Some were duplicates, some were removed, some were modified. So that was the final under this Delphi stage that I got consensus on 43 of the items. Then after that, in the Delphi study, I got the consensus that, okay, this should be included in the sense of belongingness scale for measuring this. But now, what about the clarity? What about the wording of the phrases of the statement? I did the content validation. So for content validity, these are the steps I have followed: prepare content validation form, selecting review panels, and conducting content validation, review domains items, providing score, calculating content validity index, that is CVI and ICVI. So I've conducted this. Again, I have prepared form for this stage, which is the content validation form. And that is like rating the items for relevance, very relevant, quite relevant, somewhat relevant, again on the items for the clarity, for the wording purposes. So for this, I have selected the subject experts 40, and 32 responded in this stage. Again, the criteria is not well defined in the literature for the content validation, but again, if you have to look who will be feasible for giving you the best expertise for your studies. So I have included the same kind of experts for this stage E1. And then I calculated the CVI for each of the items, and I got the item which comes the CVI for 0.70 or above, that items remained, and ICVI, that is for the whole scale. Like if it is less than 0.7, so that means that there is some problem in the scale. But for my scale, I got the 0.90, so that was like relevant. And the items, the criteria for each item that to be remained or to be removed, 0.7 or above, that is the cutoff score. So on the items which I got the 0.7, less than 0.7, I removed that items. For 0.7 and above, I have included that item in my study. So 40 items again remained here. So there was basically, it's not those of the 43 items, so 3 discarded here based on the content validity, and 40 items remained here and under the content validation. Okay. So again, then I did the response validation. I conducted interviews with the postgrad, the end users, that how they are understanding the items under those, like in the Delphi stage, in the content validity, experts have decided that yes, this, and that. In that stage, again, I've selected postgrad from Pakistan, from Scotland, and I've discussed 10 from here, 10 from Pakistan, and I was just looking into it, that how they understood the scale items, how they understood the statements. So I've discussed, and 40 items again remain. Then I have done the construct validity, the psychometrics. The psychometrics is postgrad students enrolled in online distance, and I got the response from 892 students, and I've conducted in the universities in Pakistan on online distance learner students, and also in the universities in Scotland. So on 40 items, so here I have included the, when I have developed the scale up to response validity, I have started with the medical masters in health professions education, medical education, the public health domain, so online distance learning. But when it comes to the final stage, I just looked into the scale. So it can be generalizable, it can be transferable to other specialities. So I've included those specialities in the Pakistan and those specialities in the Scotland. So the study 3 include the factor analysis. I've conducted the EFA, exploratory factor analysis, and it said if the KMO value is more than 0.5, so that is the accurate exploratory factor analysis for the study, and it comes accurate for me. And these are the items which removed at this stage. The 5 items were removed at this stage, and the total remaining items were 35. So I've started from 69 and end up on 35 items to measure the sense of belongingness. These are the factors, the 4 factors that have developed at this stage. Factor 1 is immediacy, communication, usability, and support. So these are the 4 factors they have given under the exploratory factor analysis. And if the conclusion is a newly developed 35-item sense of belongingness scale was developed with some positive initial validity and reliability testing. Further testing around generalizability will be advised to include diverse institutions and the variety of types of online programs that exist. And however, initial results show that this tool may be useful to educators to evaluate activities and changes to programs that aim to improve belongingness in postgraduate online distance learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brekhna, for that very detailed presentation. That was really interesting. Okay, I think because of time, I'm going to hand over to our next presenters. So I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Dr. Christine Haddow and Dr. Jackie Brodie from Edinburgh Napier University, who are going to talk about authentic belonging. Over to you.
Thank you. Where is the... Oh, do you have the clicker? Fabulous. Perfect. Hi, everyone. So my name is Dr. Christine Haddow. I'm a lecturer in criminology and a programme leader at Edinburgh Napier University. I'm going to be presenting with my colleague Jackie today. I don't know why I'm handing you the clicker.
I don't know. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Brodie. So I'm Head of Learning and Teaching in the Business School at Edinburgh Napier. And I'm also a programme leader of a very large online programme, so it was really interesting to hear about Brekhna's study.
Yeah, and I think our paper follows Brekhna's quite well. We're going to be talking about a lot of different kind of innovations and interventions that took place at Edinburgh Napier University in the context of the enhancement themes to support and explore community and belonging for students. So to provide a very brief overview of some of the existing literature, and I feel like that job has been done for me a little bit by our previous presenter as well, belonging in higher education has been defined in a number of ways and been seen to have a number of key features. It's been understood as a dynamic process that's focused on relationships. It's been understood as something that's linked to identity, a constantly evolving process that our students find themselves in. And it's also been understood as a series of needs to be met through interactions with others for students. And research considers what these needs might be and how these needs might vary among students. And a lot of these current definitions have been significantly influenced by Tinto's integration model, which highlights that belonging occurs in two forms. So we have both academic and social belonging, and closely links belonging to retention, so continuation on the programme of study is more likely if students feel that sense of belonging across these different domains. Literature also links belonging to the notion of community. So, of course, when students belong to something or feel a sense of belonging, it's often to a particular community that they have found or become part of during their studies. But again, there's a lot of debate about what community might be, and the best definition I could find here is a list of lots of different features that might make up community. So both concepts are definitely subject to debate, and I think, in fact, even more recently, we've seen critical perspectives emerge that suggest there's maybe a need to reframe some of these terms and to consider whether belonging is, in fact, the right word. So it has been acknowledged, and we've touched on this today, particularly in our first plenary session, that belonging might not be equal for all students. There might be unequal barriers to belonging, and students might feel different needs to belong. It might be important to some and less important to others. And some authors have questioned whether belonging is indeed the right word at all. So more recently, Karen Gravitt's work, for example, has acknowledged the idea of mattering, and maybe it's more about students feeling that they matter and have relationships that matter to them. So we're going to touch on some of these things today. I'm going to hand over to Jackie now, who's going to talk about the kind of state of belonging in the HE sector at the moment and why this has become an important topic.
Yeah, I mean, to put it back in context, Christine and I were part of a QEE team in our university, and we did start to discuss really, some of the interesting areas in terms of the NSS results. And really what we pulled out from here is when you look at overall satisfaction, and this is actually Napier's results in terms of satisfaction, we're doing quite well, actually. But then we look at the idea of community and of staff and students, and there's this real sense that almost more than a third of our students don't really feel that, sense of community that we think is really important. And actually, as Brekhna so well explained, and obviously Christine touched on, and we can see that a sense of belonging can link to retention, the student achievement, and really that well-being and that overall sense of inclusion and that sense of mattering. So it was really important for us to explore this a bit further and see, what is the university doing, or what can they do to support it even further. So as you can see as well, other key areas have also been looking at this in terms of at an institutional level and also a sector level. So Advanced HE comes to mind as well, but also QAA Scotland, and I know Susie Peacock had done a belonging toolkit as well. So this is a piece of research that we thought was quite timely to look at and to see what we've already done around belonging. So I'll just move on to my next slide. Okay, I think I've gone the wrong way, haven't I? There we go. Okay, so it's really interesting, though, to think about belonging and the COVID-19 pandemic, because I had already done some research in belonging. Being a programme leader of a very large programme, I was really interested to find out how students, whether they had a sense of belonging in online programmes. And so rather than do it on my own programme, I did it on a much smaller programme that we teach in our school. And what was really interesting was there was differences. And you've already pulled out some of those differences, particularly around the immediacy, the response of people emailing you at 2 a.m. in the morning and expecting a response, and if you didn't, they'd email you again at 7 and say, why didn't you respond? And they didn't feel like they mattered unless there was that immediacy. So you're correct. But really one of the interesting things that I found out was some of the students actually rejected belonging. They didn't feel like it needed to be part of who they were as a student. Some of them were maturer, they had the social capital, they had the connections, they had a mentor at work, and their degree was very much supporting their employability. So it was really interesting to go back and visit that, particularly once the COVID-19 pandemic had happened, because when we think about students and students' well-being, these are all of our students being online. There was a sense that we would have challenges there. I don't think any of us really realised how significant those challenges would be for our students. But already, in 2020, Norimbe had started to publish their research and look at the issues that had arisen, like around the lockdown, social distancing, the way that students felt self-isolated. So there was this real sense of stress and the students really having a barrier between them and their learning because of being online. So the nature of belonging itself has been impacted, and I think that has carried on even to now. And I think we can learn particularly from some of the activities that we've done in our university to try and overcome that. So yeah, there's a lot of research, and one of the parts of the research to try and help support that sense of belonging is thinking around things like peer support as well, because that in the literature seems to be one where that they can really connect with each other and support each other through that. And in fact, Goal Plan talks about the buffer, belonging could be a buffer to that sense of anxiety that students often felt during COVID. So really, we leave you on the final quote, really, as the post-pandemic academic world rebuilds itself, we need to get serious about communicating. And we heard about diversity this morning and also about inclusion. But again, here this afternoon, we're talking about belonging. So I'll hand you back to Christine to talk about the research that we did.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to talk a bit about Edinburgh Napier's approach to belonging enhancement. As Jackie mentioned, this work was done in the context of the enhancement themes. It was lovely to see that really impressive timeline slide that the previous plenary speakers provided with all of the kind of mapped out enhancement themed activities. And if you can cast your mind back to that slide, our work began in this area in the 2017 evidence for enhancement theme. And we were really looking at Edinburgh Napier, as Jackie said, at our NSS results and where some of the gaps were. And we were seeing that lower score around question 21 and thinking, well, what can we do about that. And the approach at Edinburgh Napier was to essentially use that enhancement theme as a catalyst to support new innovation and strengthen ongoing innovation in the area of student belonging. So the university funded a suite of what we've called mini projects, because as we'll go on to say, they were quite small scale, which look to either explore an issue around belonging for a particular student cohort, or to pilot or put in place an innovation that aimed to create a community and support belonging for students. And the table here gives a list of those projects, so they were very wide-ranging, taking place in different contexts, and a lot of different programmes in the university. We did see some common themes emerge. So, for example, we had a couple that looked at creating physical space, and we know that existing research tells us that physical space on campus can be an important part of belonging. And we had a couple of studies, pieces of work here that aimed to create a reading room for students, for example. We also talked, again, linking back to our discussion this morning about diversity and inclusion and how that links to belonging. We had a couple of projects that spoke to particular cohorts within a programme or area of study who were maybe a little bit more marginalised and maybe didn't feel that sense of belonging. So we had BAME students in law, we had men in nursing, where there wasn't really much of an established community there, and activities were put in place and discussions were had with those students. So Jackie and I were part of the university committee that worked on supporting that programme of work, and we then led an evaluation of that suite of activity to bring together the knowledge and learning from those many projects through semi-structured interviews with project leads and secondary review of the evaluation reports that they submitted. So it was a small qualitative evaluation of this suite of activity. And we were really looking to see what was the key learning, how did students understand belonging, what worked and what didn't in the mini projects, and what should we take forward from this suite of work. And we found a number of key themes through this evaluation about what seems to be effective when we think about community and belonging. So the first of these was student ownership. We found that it was really impactful where students had a chance to lead the activity, to create the communities themselves and develop communities that work for them, where they were involved in leading a group or a committee or shaping the approach. It had a number of benefits. It encouraged other students to get involved. It lent this kind of sense of legitimacy, that it was something that happened on the programme and everybody should be part of it. It ensured the longevity of the communities. So the example in the quote here is about the reading room that I mentioned before, and students kind of were taking that forward after the project lifespan, still contributing their own resources and so on to that space. And it also created communities that were kind of buy-in for the students. It meant that the communities met their particular needs. At the same time then, the role of staff was not necessarily to lead projects as such or to create a community and say, hey, you're all part of it. We found that that doesn't really work, and staff were very conscious of that. We got loads of analogies about gardening. Staff said, my role here is really planting the seeds for belonging, to allow that to flourish, to nurture those communities. So we were thinking then, right, what can we take forward from this? We need to support staff to start thinking about where those opportunities might lie and how they can set up those little conditions for belonging that can really be meaningful for students. And the third theme here that seemed to work in this context was the small-scale development of the project, which was kind of a surprise, but a nice surprise actually. So the mini projects were all funded with pretty small institutional investment, £500 maximum, I believe, per project each year. And the things that were achieved with them were quite impressive in terms of the impacts that they had for students. But what it meant was, as the quote here says, they weren't then overcooked. They didn't have super ambitious aims, they weren't constrained by big budgets, project teams, and the students were able and confident to take ownership of projects of that size. So it was really helpful actually that they were quite small in scale. So when Jackie and I were thinking about what does this all mean, what does this tell us about what works for belonging enhancement, we alighted on this idea of authenticity. What we thought brings us all together, the thread running through of all these findings really, is this idea of authenticity. our participants really stressed that communities can't be manufactured or imposed by the institution. There's a sense that there can be a kind of surface level belonging, or that we can maybe assume that belonging exists, but actually it might not. And that instead students, we need to support them to feel a legitimate connection with each other and with us. And that is really a more authentic form of belonging. And that was something that participants felt the mini projects really achieved through the approach that was used there. Now, we talk about this word authenticity in higher education research quite a lot. We talk about authentic learning environments, authentic assessments, where we're maybe mirroring real world context in what we do. What we're talking about here is, I guess, a slight departure from this. When we're talking about the word authenticity here, what we mean are the experiences, relationships and interactions that are authentic to students, that hold a depth of meaning and connection for them, and in a way mirror meaningful relationships they might form in other contexts. So authentic in the sense that they do mirror their friendships and interactions outside university. Now, Gravitt and Winston talk about this authentic relational pedagogies. They focus a bit more on staff-student relationships and how that works in the context of teaching. But I think it really mirrors the quote here, the idea that belonging has to be achieved and communities have to be formed through meaningful interaction, and that we shouldn't impose a one-size-fits-all kind of homogenising vision of what belonging is upon our students. So from all this, we developed this model of authentic belonging and what we think works for authentic belonging. I've talked about some of these themes that we've brought together here to describe bottom-up development, so the idea that students can kind of lead the charge, staff can support them to do that, and that the interventions can be quite small scale. The next question is then, of course, what does that mean for universities and institutions? What do they do? What's their role? Because essentially we're saying the students can kind of do it all. But we felt it's still really important, there is a role for institutions here to strategically prioritise belonging and belonging enhancement for students, to create staff space and time to provide resource for that, to not impose restrictions on what those communities look like necessarily. So there is definitely a role here for institutions too. And we feel like when these, or what we've seen is that when these features, when these things come together, we see meaningful communities and authentic belonging emerge. And I'm going to hand over to Jackie to conclude with some practical insights, because I think in the spirit of the enhancement themes, that's really what our learning and discussions here are all about, is what's the practical wisdom that you can take away from the session. So I'm going to hand over to Jackie to give you that. No pressure.
Oh, no pressure. You can actually see, and I know that will take a lot of reading, so hopefully you'll get to see these slides after the presentation, that there's kind of 3 levels of what we were interested in terms of what you can take away. So the first one is really thinking about, the student ownership, just making sure that the students feel that sense of empowerment. And that might be to develop some kind of society, like a film club, or it might be developing a newspaper to share with other students, but there's that whole sense of their own ownership around that. And we saw that particularly in terms of the design students when they got to design their own space that they were going to be working in. What we found, though, was a lot of our mini projects had actually gone beyond the classroom and beyond the module level, so they were actually happening at a programme level. But what's become really interesting to me and Christine, and particularly because when you speak to learners now, post-pandemic, there's a real focus on the assessment and assessment strategy, then what we've moved on now to really think around, can we get a sense of belonging through use of choice in assessment? So that's our current research, but certainly the ability to involve and get students involved in that sort of collaborative process around assessments is really important. Staff roles, as we said, it wasn't about leadership, staff leading it. It was about staff stepping back, being hands ready, but not always hands-on, allow the students themselves to really identify the opportunities and support them as well, and also to get the information out. So, for instance, one of my colleagues has a newsletter, which is very much linked to employability, but gives them options about activities that they can engage in and give them that sense of belonging. We also like the small seed corn fundings, trying different things, being innovative, making mistakes is just as important as succeeding sometimes, because we learn what will work and what will really support our students. So lots of really interesting things coming through, really. But it doesn't have to be a massive intervention. You can start small. And I know that idea of small interventions was carried on in Christine's school, and people do get small pockets of funding to be able to do it. So if we were to leave you with anything today, really, it is about allowing that space for innovation and allowing people to explore and try new projects out. So just one final slide, a couple of references for us to share with you, and you can read further information around that. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Christine and Jackie. I think what I will do is I'll invite Brekhna onto the stage as well, and then we've got time for a few questions. Anyone got any points?
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Jackie and Christine wanted to ask a question. The point about aligning with timescales in the academic year really resonated with me. I'm trying to do a project at Queen Margaret Uni that's similar. But my question was, did you collaborate with your students' union for any of this, or was it done through programs and courses?
That's a good question. So one of the projects, it was a call that was put out across the university, so all of the projects did have some student involvement. We didn't have a direct collaboration kind of across the suite of activities, I don't think, with the student union. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think they were involved in
But
a lot of the projects.
there was one project that was actually by the student union, which was creating a kind of promotional video about Team Napier and different opportunities that they afford. So there was one project that they led on as part of that.
Thank you.
A quick one from our online community. Benita's asking, did you focus on students living in university-owned accommodation or commuter students, or both? Did you take the differences into account?
We didn't really distinguish between the two. I know anecdotally, for example, one of the projects actually involved running a kind of foreign languages film night. I believe that was by your colleague in tourism. And that was actually held in the student halls. So what we found was that it was for students on this particular programme, but it started to grow organically, and students were bringing their pals from their kind of halls of residence in and so on. So no, we didn't distinguish between the two. But I think that is an interesting distinction when you're thinking about belonging, obviously. And it's something, certainly at Edinburgh Napier, we have a few campuses, and a lot of our students increasingly, because of the cost of living crisis, which is something else we're thinking quite in depth about just now, how that's impacting belonging. We know that they're commuting in, we know that their opportunities to engage in belonging activities are shrinking. So this is why I think we started thinking about on-campus activities, what's happening in the classroom, looking at assessment to promote belonging as well, not just extracurricular things. So that's kind of why that's our next step, to make sure everyone's involved.
Very good. And I think we've got time for one last question, sorry. I'm sure we can catch up with the author.
Thank you very much. This is for all of you, both of you. Very interesting projects. I was wondering about the idea of belonging, and given the growing importance of decolonization. The second presentation talked about it being, a relational, non-linear process, and the first one referred to Maslow's theory, which is hierarchical and linear. So, to what extent did you draw on and look into not only the origins of his theory, which is very problematic, but then for you others, the non-linear, to what extent did you look at decolonial thinking to underpin your researches? Thank you.
So for the belongingness, that hierarchical approach you were talking about, the Maslow's hierarchy, right? So yes, there is some limitations of this framework which stated that, like, the Maslow said that this is the hierarchical approach, but it's not necessarily. For example, if you don't have the food, if you don't have the shelter, you still have the belongingness, isn't it? It's not the hierarchical approach, but everybody wants to have the belongingness with them. And the area where I belong to from Pakistan is a very underdeveloped country. So that doesn't mean I don't have the belongingness. I have the friends, I have the peers. I just want belongingness in my institution, even if online learners. So yes, there are some limitations, but I'm also looking into that. So based on that belongingness approach and the Maslow's, the Strayhorn's approach comes in, which is specifically for the educational environment. And that includes all the affinity, the affiliation, the acceptance, the valued, and all these things comes into for the online learners. Yes.
And I think for us, I guess because we were looking less at, we did have some studies that explored belonging, but we were looking at more of what we can do to support the development of communities and create spaces and opportunities for belonging. I think for us, we were very conscious, and I think the drive of staff in setting up the projects often was to support groups who they were aware there was a lack of belonging, or some students, particular populations maybe were a bit marginalised. So I know, for example, the law project specifically looked at BAME students, their experiences there, and looked at, first of all, exploring what belonging for them looked like, and there was some really interesting observations there. Simple things about, for example, the taught examples in class. They said often, you know, we often see Sarah buying a house. Why is Fahid not buying a house, for example, in our property law examples? So there's very small changes, I think, that we can make that create that kind of sense of identity there that was talked about this morning. And then those students were supported to think about what would be a meaningful way to start creating belonging in communities for them. And there was a real focus on that not being tokenistic.
Thank you very much. I think it's time for tea and coffee in the library. But I really want to join me and thank all our speakers. I'm afraid we've run out of time, so I'm going to move on.